Alright, this is Unit 11, the diversity of life, and in this first video we're going to hash out the first 3 sections. So it's all about prokaryotes and the different types of bacteria. So starting with just basic information about bacteria, don't forget that they're unicellular and that they do not have a nucleus, so therefore they're a prokaryote. They are going to have a cell wall, which makes them kind of like a plant, and then they kind of join together in chains or clumps. So we're going to take a look at a few of them here real quick. So the first one, these are called bacilli type bacteria. They're rod-shaped, and if it ends in the coccus, so like streptococcus or staphylococcus, those are usually the round-shaped bacteria. So strep tends to arrange itself in long chains like this, whereas staph tends to cluster into big groups a little bit more. And then monococcus are just kind of individual ones off on their own or just in pairs. So just different ways, but they're the round-shaped bacteria. And then Spirillus is literally spiral-shaped bacteria. And the only organelle that they contain is a ribosome, which means that they're going to be able to make some proteins specific to their particular job. They're only about 1 micrometer in size, and we use this kind of U-looking shape with a curly Q on the front to show that it's a micrometer. And I know that's hard to put in perspective because we don't use the metric system in the United States, plus we don't measure in micrometers very often. So here's a strand of hair under an electron microscope, and across this hair, that's about 100 micrometers wide. Over here is a grain of salt. This is about 1,000 micrometers wide. So if we're looking at a bacteria as only 1 micrometer, you can see just how, I mean, it would be like a dot on this piece of hair over here. So having them be really small gives them a really big surface area to volume ratio, and therefore they can get nutrients inside really quickly and then get rid of waste really quickly as well. So it makes them very efficient. We like that large ratio. All bacteria kind of have unique features, first being something called a capsule. It's a slimy layer going all the way around the outside of the bacteria. It's going to help protect it from all those harsh environments that it has to live in. So helps keep it alive a little bit longer, keep it safer. And then right under the capsule is a cell wall. Like we said, they're kind of like a plant in that aspect. And that cell wall is there for support and protection as well. And they often have a flagella, which is the tail-like structure coming off the back. And remember, that kind of spins like a boat motor. So it kind of helps propel the bacteria forward, although they lack steering. So can't really pinpoint exactly where they're going, but they can move. And then these little hair-like structures coming off, those are called pili. And they're going to help the bacteria hook on to all kinds of surfaces, which is why we find bacteria on almost every surface. And it also can do a little bit of propel movement as well, just like the flagella. And then we already talked about the ribosome. That's their only organelle, and it allows them to make proteins. So all bacteria reproduce through that process called binary fission. And we've talked about this in the past. So bi means 2, and fission means splitting. So we're literally splitting into 2. So it's asexual reproduction. You're going to get an exact clone of the original parent. 2 identical daughter cells are formed, and so we have circular DNA usually that gets copied very quickly. We simply split that capsule, split the cell membrane, or excuse me, cell wall area as well, and then we make 2, and they grow exponentially. So 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 8, 8 becomes 16. So this happens very quickly. This is why bacteria in just a matter of 30 minutes can go from just a few hundred to several thousand. So bacteria have to get their energy lots of different ways. Several of them are autotrophs, meaning that they do photosynthesis. They can do it themselves. A lot of them are heterotrophs, so they have to somehow feed off something else. That can be chemicals. We call them a chemotroph. So something like ammonia, sulfur, cyanide, they can actually live off those chemicals. Other times they have to kind of get it off of a plant, so that's what we call mutualism. Those are the bacteria that live on the roots of the plants, and so they actually leach some of those nutrients off of them, but in turn they're actually helping the plant stay alive as well. Or a parasitism type case where they're living inside of a species and they're just feeding off of whatever that species is feeding off of. So the shape of bacteria is actually circular, so they have circular chromosomes. They also contain some additional DNA called plasmids, which are also circular, but they have resistance genes in them, and that helps transfer, or they can actually transfer that resistance gene from one bacteria to the next. So it's kind of cool. It helps keep one bacteria stronger, and that kind of keeps their bacteria species replicating. So let's look at a couple examples of bacteria. The first one would be E. coli, and these are the rod-shaped type bacteria, and this is an abbreviated name, stands for Escherichia coli. It's named after the scientist who actually discovered it. So we just abbreviate that Escherichia to a big capital E, and then leave the coli part. You find E. coli naturally in the intestines of all endotherms, so those are animals that can regulate their heat internally, and we actually need E. coli to help with a little bit of digestion, so breaking down some of those heavier like plant material type things. However, there is one strain of E. coli that does cause food poisoning, and so oftentimes you'll hear of an E. coli outbreak on the news. It usually happens in certain kinds of foods like spinach or tomatoes, and what that tells us then is that farmer probably fertilized that crop with manure, So there shows us there was a fecal contamination, and so, anytime you use manure from cows or cattle or sheep or anything like that, and you actually use it on a crop, there is a high chance that there can be an E. coli outbreak, and it can make people pretty sick. Another example is Streptococcus bacteria. These are spherical bacteria, so that coccus means round, and they gather in big long chains. So there's lots of different strains of strep, and they cause all kinds of different things. The most common one we know of is we just call it strep throat, so makes your throat really sore. There's one called rheumatic fever. There's meningitis, which affects the meninges around the brain and spinal cord. And then we also have pneumonia, which is more of like a lung type disease. Another one that we've actually talked about in the past is MRSA, MRSA, and it stands for methicillin-resistant Staph aureus. And these are also spherical bacteria, and they gather in big clusters like this. Some symptoms for MRSA would be red bumps, boils, they get a really high fever, and in worst case scenario, they go into toxic shock syndrome, and in even worse conditions, it can lead to death. So we talked about MRSA as being really prevalent in hospitals, because they become resistant to the chemical cleaning products that the hospital staff use. Unfortunately, that's one of the places where MRSA is kind of running rampant right now. And then an example of good bacteria would be some found in yogurt. There's lots of strains of bacteria in yogurt. It's actually what gives it that kind of thicker texture that's pretty unique to yogurt. When we eat it and get it into our body, it actually helps kind of maintain what we call normal body flora. So just keeping your body nice and healthy. And for women, it plays a big part with her female reproductive area and helping to maintain kind of a healthy, normal bacteria culture down there as well. Another example of some good bacteria would be the nitrogen-fixing type. This is a case of symbiosis, almost mutualism, where the bacteria live on the roots of the legumes, and they help convert nitrogen gas into ammonia. And that ammonia gets converted again, and actually that's something the plants need to grow and keep living. So this is really helpful to farmers. Very good bacteria. It keeps their soil healthy, and it helps their plants grow nice and big and healthy as well. And because bacteria is living, we can actually kill it with something called an antibiotic. The first antibiotic ever made was penicillin, and a guy named Alexander Fleming is the one who actually discovered it. So, and penicillin is a fungus. And he created penicillin just kind of on a whim. Just thought he'd try it and see if it worked, and it did. And so ever since then, this is actually one of the most prescribed antibiotics still today, although a lot of people have some sensitivity to this type of antibiotic, lots of penicillin allergies, because again, it is a fungus, which is in the same family as mold and things like that. So some people just can't take it. They're a little bit intolerant to it. So what an antibiotic does is it breaks down the cell wall, making that bacteria weak. It can also prevent nutrient uptake for the bacteria and weakening that capsule that goes around the outside and keeps it safe as well. All right, and then our last little section here is on the archaea bacteria, which are the extreme types. So they're going to have a little bit different cell wall than just normal everyday eubacteria. They are still unicellular, and they have circular chromosomes as well, just a single one. Still use a flagella, and they're still going to undergo binary fission through asexual reproduction. And they're going to feed off chemicals, so those are the chemotrophs, or they can do the photosynthesis and be autotrophic. So the ones that feed off some of those chemicals, we have like halophiles. That prefix halo means salt, and phile means loving. So those are the salt lovers. Thermophiles, thermos heat, phile means loving, so they're extreme heat lovers. And then the methanogens. Methanogens actually produce methane waste. So they're the ones who help break down cellulose, which is found in plant cell walls. And as a byproduct, methane gets produced, which is why a lot of animals that eat a lot of plant material, like cows, they tend to be quite smelly. Lots of methane gas gets produced. We have lots of uses for archaeobacteria. In the past, we've used them to clean up toxic water, so things like oil spills. We can kind of naturally use the bacteria to help eliminate and break down that oil for us. And out in Lead, in a coal mine, once the coal mine closed down, they actually used it to clean up the cyanide, kind of that waste product from mining that coal. And so lots of useful help. Again, we also said they live in those intestines of the cows, so it helps them digest grass. And there's lots of other things that we still don't even know about yet. Because they live in such extreme environments, it's a little bit harder to test them and actually see their usefulness. So scientists are just starting to dive into this particular type of kingdom and really take a look at all the cool things that they can do. All right, and that's the end of sections 1 through 3.